You people never truly belong here." The words didn't just echo, they cracked, sharp and merciless, across the ballroom like a whip. 100 jeweled heads turned in unison, silence washing through the golden light of chandeliers. The string quartet faltered mid-note. At the center of that silence stood the hostess, young, white, the kind of beauty sculpted for magazine covers, skin glowing, lips lacquered, hair curled into waves that spilled across bare shoulders. Her dress was a short blaze of red silk, cut to command attention, cut to remind everyone she owned the night. And now, she owned the stage. She lifted a dessert plate, a perfect slice of frosted cake gleaming under the lights. A smile, smug, poisonous, tugged her mouth. Without hesitation, she hurled it forward. Smash. The impact was brutal. Frosting burst across the black CEO's face, dripping down her chin, splattering her coral dress in chalk-white streaks. For a frozen second, the entire ballroom inhaled. And then came the laughter, harsh, nervous, relieved, like an audience grateful they weren't the target. Phones rose into the air, glasses clinked. A man coughed awkwardly before joining in the cruel chorus. The hostess basked in it all, tilting her head, laughter spilling out like champagne. "Money doesn't buy class," she declared, her voice slicing into the growing noise. But the CEO did not break. She stood motionless, spine a rod of steel beneath the fabric. The coral dress unadorned, precise hugged her form with dignity that no frosting could erase. Her hair, pulled back tight, revealed every line of her expression, and that expression was calm, utterly calm. She lifted her hand, slow as a ritual. She scraped frosting from her cheek with 2 fingers, studied it, and let it fall. The cream landed on marble with the tiniest splatter, yet the sound carried like a gavel in court. Laughter faltered, the room shifted. Guests traded glances. Somewhere in the back, a voice whispered, "Who is she?" The hostess swirled her champagne flute, emboldened by her crowd. Crimson fabric shimmered as she leaned closer, smile sharpened. Her words were venom, but loud enough for every billionaire and aristocrat to hear. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Chuckles scattered, thinner this time. Some guests laughed because they thought they had to. Others simply looked away. But all eyes kept returning to the woman at the center, the one covered in frosting, yet radiating something heavier than shame. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. The black CEO's silence carried weight. Not weakness, not surrender. A weight that pressed into the marble floor, into the golden air, into the laughter that had already begun to wither. The night had been designed to humiliate her. Instead, it had given her the stage. And though no one knew it yet, the storm had already arrived. The gala had been advertised for months as the event of the season, a night of champagne and charity, of velvet gowns and whispered deals. The ballroom itself was a monument to privilege, vaulted ceilings painted with cherubs, marble floors polished to a mirror shine, and chandeliers that poured golden fire on everything beneath them. This was not just a party. It was a stage where power rehearsed itself in public. The hostess ruled that stage. She glided through the room in her scarlet dress, every step clicking against the marble like punctuation. Guests orbited her as if drawn by gravity, banking heirs, tech billionaires, museum patrons with diamonds at their throats. To them, she was not simply a hostess, she was a gatekeeper. Her family's name was engraved into half the endowments in the city. This gala was her kingdom, and tonight she had exercised her right to decide who belonged and who did not. The black CEO stood at the center of it all, frosting still marking her skin, the coral of her dress ruined in cream stains. Around her, conversations resumed in fragments, sharp whispers, awkward laughter, the kind of talk people use to cover their unease. No one stepped forward to help her. Not a single hand offered a napkin. That was the power of the hostess. Her scorn became contagious. To side with the humiliated was to risk exile from the circle. "Unbelievable," muttered a man in a white tuxedo, shaking his head but refusing to meet her eyes. "She shouldn't have come," said another woman, her voice low but pointed, as if the humiliation had been earned. And above them, the hostess laughed again, the sound echoing through the vaulted hall, commanding the rhythm of the night like a conductor's baton. Waiters kept pouring champagne, as though nothing had happened. The string quartet returned to their bows, but the air was altered thicker, charged. Every glance that slid toward the black CEO was part curiosity, part fear, part hunger for more spectacle. She did not move. Not yet. The hostess raised her glass in a mock toast, her smile dripping with triumph. "To the ones who know their place," she announced. A ripple of forced chuckles answered. Guests lifted glasses, eyes darting, trying to align themselves with her power without drowning in her cruelty. What none of them saw, what none of them wanted to see, was the stillness of the woman they mocked. For in that stillness there was a gravity of its own, heavier than chandeliers, heavier than marble, a silence that pulled eyes back to her again and again. The ballroom belonged to the hostess, or so it seemed. But storms do not announce themselves with thunder. They gather in silence, until the weight of the air is impossible to ignore. And tonight, the storm was standing quietly in a coral dress, watching, waiting. The laughter didn't fade, it swelled. Like a tide emboldened by its own momentum, it crashed louder with every passing second. The ballroom, once poised and dignified, now resembled a theater where cruelty was the entertainment. Phones gleamed in raised hands. Red recording dots blinked across the sea of tuxedos and gowns, capturing the moment from every angle. A man near the front zoomed in on the frosting dripping down the CEO's jaw. A young influencer whispered to her camera, "You guys, you're not going to believe what just happened at the Hamilton Gala. Wait till you see this." She laughed, spun the lens back toward the hostess, and cheered. The hostess relished it. She strutted to the edge of the stage, scarlet silk hugging her curves, her smile wide enough to be cruel. She lifted her glass, gesturing toward the CEO. "See? Proof that money can buy you a ticket in," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "But it can't buy you belonging." The crowd roared. Some guests clapped, others only smirked, but none interfered. It was safer to laugh with the powerful than to stand beside the humiliated. That was the unspoken law of the elite. Allegiance to the gatekeeper, silence toward the victim. A waiter stumbled past with a tray of eclairs. The hostess plucked one, glanced at it, then with a theatrical toss hurled it toward the CEO's feet. The eclairs exploded into crumbs across the marble. "Oops," she said, feigning innocence, her friends howling in laughter. The black CEO remained still. Frosting streaked her skin like war paint, her coral dress ruined, her dignity seemingly stripped. Yet she stood with a posture unbroken, chin lifted, shoulders squared, eyes unwavering. But the cruelty kept climbing. A man in a navy tuxedo leaned close to his date, voice sharp enough to be overheard. "Imagine thinking she could blend in here. It's laughable." His date giggled, covering her mouth, though her eyes flickered with something less certain. Another guest muttered, "She should be grateful she even got invited. Some people just don't know their place." The hostess soaked in their words as though they were applause. She tilted her glass once more. "Let tonight be a reminder," she declared, "that lineage, heritage, and elegance cannot be imitated. They are born, not bought." The statement hung in the air like perfume sweet to those desperate to belong, suffocating to anyone who dared think otherwise. Cameras kept rolling. Laughter pressed harder. The humiliation was not just personal now, it was becoming viral, history in the making. The image of frosting and silk, of power and silence, was already captured, already multiplying across feeds. And still, the black CEO did not move. She simply drew a breath, slow and deliberate. Her eyes scanned the room, not with fear, but with the patience of someone watching others dig their own grave. The ballroom believed it was witnessing the fall of a pretender, but what they were truly watching was the silence before revelation. Frosting still clung to her cheek, cooling as it hardened under the chandelier's relentless heat. The coral fabric of her dress, once immaculate, was now stained with white streaks that mocked her presence. To the room, she was a spectacle. To herself, she was something else entirely. Inside, her mind was not chaos. It was clarity. She remembered her grandmother's words, whispered years ago in a kitchen that smelled of cornbread and soap. "The world will test you, not with fire, but with ice. They will freeze you out, make you feel invisible, humiliate you in public. But dignity is not a voice you raise, it's a silence you master." The laughter around her rippled again, sharp as glass breaking. Phones hovered close, capturing her stillness. The hostess, crimson dress glinting like a weapon, tilted her glass higher. More barbs, more venom. The ballroom danced to her cruelty like puppets on strings. But the Black CEO heard none of it. Not really. She heard the steadiness of her own breath, the pulse of her heart slow, deliberate, each inhale a reminder. She had already fought wars far greater than a plate of cake. Each exhale. She had already endured rooms colder, crowds crueler, hands rougher than this. Her silence was not surrender. It was calculation. The frosting on her skin became a mask, but not of shame, of patience. Every smear across her coral dress was a tally, a record of arrogance she would repay. She could feel the room's weight pressing against her, trying to crush her posture into collapse. Yet her spine stayed straight, her chin unbowed. She glanced briefly at the hostess. The woman's laughter was wide, teeth flashing, eyes gleaming with superiority. Around her, guests drank, clapped, mocked. The balance of the night seemed absolute. But in that glance, the Black CEO saw something no one else noticed, a flicker, a tremor in the hostess's performance. Because cruelty always hid insecurity, and arrogance always feared exposure. Her eyes drifted over the crowd, men in tuxedos, women in diamonds, influencers clutching their phones. Every one of them complicit, every one of them certain they were safe in their alliance with privilege. She memorized their faces, not with rage, but with precision. Then, slowly, she drew another breath. Her silence deepened. A storm does not declare itself. It gathers in the distance, unnoticed, until the air is too heavy to ignore. That was what she felt in her chest now, the gathering, the swell. They thought they had broken her. They thought frosting and laughter had reduced her to an object, a prop in their performance of superiority. But they had given her something instead. A stage, a microphone without wires, an audience that believed they were watching a downfall. They were wrong, because humiliation was not her ending, it was the overture. The air in the ballroom had shifted. What began as a single act of humiliation now swelled into theater. The hostess, red dress blazing under the chandeliers, knew her audience and played to it with practiced cruelty. She stepped closer to the Black CEO, heels striking the marble like cymbals. A fresh plate of macarons was plucked from a waiter's tray. She toyed with one, rolling it between manicured fingers, then flicked it into the CEO's lap. The crowd erupted in laughter. Another followed, this time landing near her feet, scattering crumbs across the coral fabric. "Oh, darling," the hostess purred, her voice loud enough to carry. "Coral is such a delicate color. Pity it stains so easily." The laughter came sharper this time. Phones rose higher. A young socialite whispered, "This is savage," her own camera shaking as she filmed. An older matriarch, pearls glistening at her neck, chuckled into her glass of wine, choosing amusement over conscience. The hostess circled the CEO like a predator circling prey. "You see, ladies and gentlemen," she said, raising her champagne flute, "our guest tonight thought a bank account could buy her a crown. But crowns are inherited. Crowns are born." The words hit like stones. Gasps mingled with cruel laughter. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore, they were complicit, feeding on the spectacle. Every sneer, every smirk, every raised glass confirmed it. The CEO remained still. Her coral dress, now streaked with frosting and crumbs, clung to her like a banner of endurance. Her face was calm, but her silence made the cruelty louder, as if her refusal to collapse infuriated the room further. The hostess noticed. Her smile flickered, then sharpened. She leaned close, whispering loud enough for microphones and cameras. "You should be grateful, you know. I've given you more attention tonight than you'll ever deserve in a lifetime." The cruelty drew applause. Someone clapped slowly, mockingly. Another voice in the back shouted, "Show her the door!" And with that, the chant began. Small at first, then louder. "Out! Out! Out!" The hostess spread her arms like a conductor basking in the orchestra of disdain. Her crimson dress shimmered, her grin widened, and she gestured dramatically toward the exit. The chant rose. Phones filmed. The humiliation peaked. But amid the jeers and the chaos, the Black CEO's silence remained untouched. She stood in the center like stone in a storm, absorbing every insult, every laugh, every chant. And in her stillness, something unspoken began to shift. The crowd thought they were driving her out. They didn't realize they were building her stage. The cruelty had reached its crescendo. What came next would silence them all. The chant echoed off marble and glass. "Out, out, out." It thundered like a verdict, rising with each repetition, until the ballroom itself seemed to shake with the force of conformity. Faces gleamed with sweat and cruelty under the chandeliers. Phones recorded, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. The hostess basked in it. She raised her arms higher, conducting the humiliation like a maestro. Her crimson dress blazed as she spun slowly, showing off the crowd's allegiance as though their laughter were jewels around her neck. "See?" she shouted over the noise. "This is what happens when pretenders try to wear crowns." And still she stood. The black CEO did not budge. The chant crashed against her like waves against stone, loud, relentless, yet powerless to move her. Frosting hardened on her cheek, crumbs clung to the coral of her dress, but her spine held straight, her chin lifted. Then it happened. She raised her hand. Not quickly, not desperately, but with the calm deliberation of a judge quieting a courtroom. Fingers straightened, palm steady, the gesture so unexpected it sliced through the chant. A ripple of silence spread. Voices faltered. Cameras zoomed closer. The hostess blinked, her triumphant grin twitching at the edges. "Oh?" she sneered, stepping closer. "Finally found your voice?" But the CEO didn't speak. Not yet. She simply wiped another streak of frosting from her collarbone, held it up between two fingers, and let it drop. The sound of cream splattering marble was soft, but it cracked louder than any chant. The room froze. For the first time that night, it was not the hostess but the CEO who commanded the silence. Eyes shifted. Guests glanced at one another, unsure. The performance had slipped, the script rewritten. Finally she spoke. Her voice was calm, resonant, carrying without need of a microphone. "Are you certain you want to do this?" The question wasn't loud, but it struck like thunder. It wasn't anger. It wasn't a plea. It was a warning. The hostess laughed nervously, her glass trembling slightly in her hand. She masked it with bravado, tossing her hair back. "Do what? Remind everyone who doesn't belong?" The CEO's gaze cut through her, steady and unblinking. Her silence stretched again, heavier this time, until even the violins in the corner seemed to hesitate mid-bow. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A man lowered his phone. A woman pressed her lips together, suddenly unsure of her smirk. The certainty that had fueled the chant now wavered, cracked by the weight of a calm they could not explain. The hostess forced another laugh, louder, sharper, desperate to regain control. But in that laugh was something fragile, something the room was beginning to hear. Because for the first time all night, it was clear. The black CEO was not the victim they thought she was. She was the storm they had mistaken for silence. The silence she commanded was thick, almost unbearable. 100 faces stared at her, frosting clinging to her cheek like a mark of war, coral fabric ruined but her presence untouchable. The air felt heavy, every second stretching into something uncomfortably long. Then the whispers began. "Who is she?" a young man muttered, lowering his phone. "I've seen her before. She was on the cover of Forbes, wasn't she?" another guest whispered, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier light. "No, that can't be. If she were that woman, she wouldn't be standing here alone," came the skeptical reply. But uncertainty spread like cracks across ice. The chant had died, the laughter had thinned. In its place, murmurs multiplied, questions crawling through the ballroom. The hostess tried to seize the moment back. She lifted her glass again, forcing a wide smile. "Don't be fooled," she sneered. "A fancy headline doesn't make you royalty. This is my house, my city, my world. She's just another outsider trying to sneak through the door." But her voice no longer carried the same power. It wavered, ever so slightly, beneath the rising tide of recognition. Guests were remembering articles, interviews, boardroom photos. They had seen this woman's face before, not smeared with cake, but framed in headlines that spoke of billions. The CEO stood unmoving, her silence more articulate than the hostess's words. Her eyes scanned the crowd, resting briefly on those who whispered, long enough for them to drop their gaze in shame. Then she spoke again, quiet, steady, each word deliberate. "You think I'm here because I needed your invitation?" Gasps rippled through the hall. The simplicity of her tone struck harder than the insult. It was not defiance, it was certainty. A man near the front shifted uneasily, tugging at his cufflinks. "Wait," he whispered to his wife. "Isn't she the one who—" His voice trailed, but his meaning lingered in the air. Phones stopped recording and started searching instead. Guests scrolled feverishly, fingers tapping, screens glowing in the dim light, and there it was, her face, unsmeared, her name beside numbers that made even the wealthiest in the room shrink. A woman gasped, hand over her mouth. Another guest whispered, "Oh my God." The hostess noticed. Panic flickered across her face before she smothered it with another brittle laugh. "Don't let her fool you," she shouted. "She's no one, nothing." But even as she spoke, her eyes darted to the crowd, reading their shifting expressions, sensing the fracture in her control. The black CEO did not need to shout. She let the murmurs do the work for her, let recognition bloom like fire in dry grass. She had always understood. Power didn't come from raising your voice. It came from making others lower theirs. The tide was turning, and the hostess could feel it slipping from her grip. The humiliation had been hers to orchestrate, but now, revelation was no longer in her control, and the storm was about to break. The ballroom buzzed with whispers, nervous and electric. Screens glowed as fingers scrolled, faces paling as truth cut through rumor. They had come expecting theater, gossip, a safe spectacle of humiliation. Instead, they found themselves staring at a woman whose name was etched across industries they depended on. The black CEO let them whisper. She stood steady in her ruined coral dress, frosting still clinging to her cheek, her silence commanding. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but clear, slicing through the noise like glass through silk. "Some of you here," she said, eyes sweeping the crowd, "sign my contracts without even reading them. Some of you cash dividends from the companies I own." Gasps. Someone's phone slipped from their hand and shattered against the marble. A man in the second row stiffened, his face draining of color. He recognized her name now because it was on the checks his firm received every quarter. The hostess laughed, brittle, sharp. "She's bluffing. This is just performance. Don't listen to her." She raised her champagne, but her hand shook, spilling golden drops down her wrist. The CEO turned her gaze on her, calm, unflinching. "You call this your house, your city, your world." She paused, her voice gaining weight with every syllable. "But tell me what happens when the loans behind your galleries, your boutiques, your real estate vanish overnight." The words fell heavy. Silence swallowed the laughter. Guests shifted, glanced at one another. Some already knew, some realized for the first time. Their comfort, their wealth, their positions, all threads woven into a fabric she had the power to cut. "Enough!" the hostess snapped, her voice cracking against the marble. "You don't scare anyone here." But her own friends looked uneasy now, their smiles brittle, their laughter forced. One man muttered under his breath, "She controls the tech fund, doesn't she?" Another whispered, "And the airline shares God. She's that woman." The CEO took a slow breath, as if she had all the time in the world. She raised her hand again, palm outward, not to silence, but to steady. The ballroom leaned in, listening despite themselves. "Are you certain?" she repeated softly, echoing her earlier warning, "that this is the stage you want to stand on with me?" The words didn't just fill the room, they shifted it. Power itself tilted, subtle but undeniable, like the first tremor before an earthquake. The hostess tried to laugh again, louder this time, but it was hollow, desperate. Her crimson dress still sparkled, but it no longer blazed. The crowd wasn't looking at her anymore. They were watching the woman she had tried to humiliate, the one standing calm in coral and cream, radiating a storm that no one could escape. And for the first time all night, fear flickered not in the victim's eyes, but in the hostess's. The hostess's laugh rang out again, sharp and brittle, echoing far too loudly in the vaulted ballroom. It was a sound meant to reassure her guests, to tighten her grip on the room. But instead, it betrayed her. There was a tremor in it, thin, fragile, unmistakable. The crowd felt it. Eyes that once glimmered with complicity now shifted uneasily. Champagne flutes lowered. Phones slipped out of recording mode. No one wanted to be caught on the wrong side of the tide. The air was changing, tilting. The humiliation that had seemed so safe, so collective, was starting to feel dangerous. "She's bluffing," the hostess insisted, her voice cracking at the edges. She turned, seeking the crowd's approval, desperate for their chorus. "She's nothing, just a pretender who bought her way in." But no one cheered, no one laughed. Instead, whispers swelled louder than applause. "She owns the fund that backs their endowment. Wait, I think she's on the board of the airline. My husband just closed a deal with her company last quarter." Recognition bloomed across the room like fire catching dry paper. Faces paled. Diamonds glittered nervously as women touched their necklaces for comfort. Men tugged at collars too tight around their throat. And still, the black CEO stood motionless, frosting hardened on her skin like armor, her coral dress ruined but regal. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The silence around her had become its own weapon. The hostess's eyes darted desperately across her guests, searching for an ally. But those who had laughed the loudest now avoided her gaze. A man she once called a friend turned his back, pretending to sip his drink. A woman who had clapped earlier now busied herself with her phone, scrolling feverishly as if hoping for proof that this humiliation was safe. It wasn't safe anymore. The CEO finally moved, just a step, just enough to shift the center of gravity in the room. Her gaze fell on the hostess, and her words were quiet but merciless. Power doesn't need a stage. But tonight you gave me one. The crowd inhaled, sharp and collective. The hostess tried again, desperation leaking through her glamour. This is my city, my gala, you— Her voice cracked. The champagne flute in her hand trembled, spilling golden liquid across her wrist. She tightened her grip, as if holding the glass tighter could keep the room from slipping away. But the truth was visible now. Her control was fracturing, splintering like glass under pressure. The smile she forced was too wide, too strained. Her eyes darted like prey, not predator. And around her, the crowd leaned subtly away. The balance had shifted. The humiliation no longer belonged to the black CEO. It clung instead to the hostess, staining her crimson dress more deeply than any frosting ever could. The fall had begun. The hostess's smile had cracked beyond repair. Crimson lips stretched too wide, trembling at the corners. The laughter she tried to summon died in her throat, swallowed by the silence pressing in from every side. Her crimson dress still blazed under the chandeliers, but it no longer radiated power. It clung to her like desperation. The black CEO took another step forward. The marble floor gleamed beneath her heels, frosting drying like white scars across her coral dress. Yet she stood taller with every moment, her presence filling the ballroom more than chandeliers or music ever could. Her voice came steady, each word deliberate, every syllable carrying the weight of inevitability. This foundation you celebrate tonight, this endowment you all toast, runs on my funding. A gasp tore through the crowd, sharp and collective. Heads turned toward the hostess, whose face blanched as if the words had struck her physically. I've poured $4.2 billion into the very structure you claim as your empire, the CEO continued. Her tone was not boastful, it was factual, surgical. And tonight, in front of every one of your allies, your patrons, your cameras, I withdraw it. Silence, then panic. Guests gasped. Phones lit up. Conversations exploded in frantic whispers. A man clutched his chest, muttering, "That's the entire lifeline of the foundation." Another hissed to his companion, "Without her, they collapse." The hostess staggered, her glass slipping from her hand and shattering across the marble. Champagne bled across the floor like liquid gold, pooling at her heels. You can't," she stammered, her voice suddenly small, stripped of bravado. "This is my family's—" "It was," the CEO cut in, her voice calm, final. "But now, it ends." The weight of her words crushed the ballroom. Guests who once laughed at frosting now stood pale, their futures unraveling in the span of seconds. The glamour of the gala disintegrated, replaced by dread. Whispers turned into a tide. "She just pulled billions. The gala, the foundation, it's finished. They'll lose everything." And for the first time, all eyes abandoned the hostess. They turned fully, completely, toward the black CEO. Not as an object of ridicule, not as prey, but as the true power in the room. The hostess tried to speak again, but her voice broke into a whisper, drowned beneath the storm she had summoned herself. Her crown, the unspoken authority she had carried into the night, had shattered, and everyone saw the fragments glittering at her feet. The black CEO raised her chin, steady, unbroken, and let the silence linger just long enough to seal the truth. The humiliation had flipped. The gala no longer belonged to its hostess. It belonged to the woman she had tried to destroy. And the empire that had mocked her was crumbling before their very eyes. The ballroom erupted into chaos. What had been laughter minutes earlier now fractured into panicked whispers, hurried footsteps, and frantic phone calls. Diamond-studded patrons turned pale, clutching their devices as though 4.2 billion had been stripped directly from their own pockets. "Check the markets," one man hissed to his assistant, his voice tight with dread. "They'll announce it by morning," another muttered, eyes darting toward the exit as if distance could shield him from the fallout. The hostess stood frozen, champagne pooling around the shards of her shattered glass. Her crimson dress no longer shimmered, it seemed garish now, vulgar against the enormity of what she had lost. Guests she once called friends, allies, donors, one by one, they stepped back. No one reached for her hand. No one whispered comfort. Instead, they turned away, eager to disassociate themselves from the collapse unraveling in real time. A socialite pulled her shawl tighter, muttering, "She's finished." Another woman, once seated at the hostess's table, leaned into her husband's ear. "We should leave, before we're photographed beside her." Photographers had already arrived at the edges of the ballroom, drawn like vultures to the scent of ruin. Cameras flashed, capturing the crimson hostess in her unraveling her crown of arrogance fallen, her power stripped. And in every photo, framed just beyond her, stood the black CEO, calm, composed, frosting still clinging to her dress like proof of survival. News alerts pinged on phones across the hall. Headlines scrolled faster than guests could read them. Black CEO withdraws $4.2 billion from Hamilton Foundation. Shock at Gala. Hostess publicly humiliated as funding pulled. Power shift. Billion. Dollar empire collapses overnight. Oh. The hostess tried to speak, tried to reclaim even a shred of her authority. "This is my family's legacy," she cried, voice breaking as she looked desperately at the crowd. But no one listened. The words dissolved into the murmur of reporters, the tap of guests arranging car services, the whispers of lawyers calculating their next move. The black CEO hadn't moved. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than the panic. Her stillness was gravity itself, drawing every eye, every headline, every allegiance toward her. The hostess's father's portrait loomed over the ballroom, painted in oil decades ago, a symbol of dynastic power. Tonight, it seemed almost to mock her. Beneath it, her legacy crumbled in real time, abandoned by the very people who had cheered her cruelty an hour earlier. The chant of "out, out," that once targeted the black CEO now seemed to linger over the hostess herself, not spoken aloud, but written in every averted gaze, every hurried step toward the exit. Her kingdom had fallen, and at its center, calm as ever, stood the woman she had tried to humiliate, no longer the target of ridicule, but the architect of collapse. The ballroom was no longer a place of glamour. It was a ruined crimson silk trembling, champagne-staining marble, whispers cutting sharper than violins ever could. The hostess stood abandoned, her empire crumbling in the glow of smartphones and flashing cameras. But at the center of it all, calm, unbent, stood the black CEO. She did not rush. She did not gloat. She simply adjusted the coral dress that clung to her form, frosting hardened across its fabric like battle scars. Her hand brushed a streak from her cheek, not to hide it, but to reveal the steadiness of her gaze beneath. Reporters pressed forward, their voices sharp, hungry. "Is it true you've pulled the entire endowment? Will the Hamilton Foundation collapse tonight? What message are you sending with this decision?" She raised her hand just as she had before when silencing the chant. Instantly, voices dropped. The power was no longer in the hostess's crimson dress, or her family's name. It was here, in a woman whose presence commanded obedience without a single shout. Her voice was measured, deliberate. Dignity is not for sale. Power is not a crown you wear. It is the truth you stand on when the world tries to break you. The words rang across marble and glass, searing into the silence left behind. No one dared interrupt. Even the cameras seemed to pause, as if the lens itself understood it was capturing history. The hostess crumpled further into her isolation. Once radiant, she now appeared small beneath the chandeliers, her beauty hollow, her allies vanished. Every eye in the room had turned from her. Even the portrait of her father above seemed to glare down in judgment. The black CEO turned, heels striking the marble with steady rhythm. The crowd parted without hesitation, forming an aisle as though instinct recognized sovereignty when it saw it. Men in tuxedos stepped back. Women in diamonds lowered their gazes. Even the waiters stilled, trays suspended midair. She did not look back. As she passed the great doors, her voice carried one final time. Humiliation does not weaken us. It reveals who truly holds the crown. The words echoed long after she was gone. Outside, cameras flared like lightning. Journalists surged forward, broadcasting her walk into the night as though it were a coronation. The headlines had already written themselves, but the truth was larger than ink or pixels. It was the sight of a woman who had endured the storm and emerged untouchable. Inside the ballroom, silence lingered. The hostess collapsed into a chair, her crimson dress pooling around her like the ruins of a throne. No one came to comfort her. The chant of "out, out" whispered through memory, but this time it was hers alone to hear. And somewhere in the city, in boardrooms and homes and whispered conversations, people repeated the lesson of the night. Power does not need noise. Justice does not need a crown. Dignity cannot be erased by frosting on silk. The Black CEO had left her mark not on the dress she wore, but on the world that finally understood. The gala was over. The empire was gone. The legacy of silence and steel had just begun.